Hello and welcome to AFP. My name is Devang and Sean, and I'm joined by the usual suspects, David, Goss, and Sean K. On today's show, we chat. The MLS playoff picture gets a bit clearer. The Whitecaps deliver a knockout blow to Seattle. We jump on a call with the Athletics' Joshua Kloke to chat about his new book, The Voyageurs, the Canadian men's soccer team's quest to reach the World Cup. Great chat there. We talk about the friendlies coming up for Canada against Qatar and Uruguay. Plus, as always, it's the mailbag. Ask AFP. Gentlemen, how are we doing? It's been a busy week. We're on the cusp of international soccer, which I know is one of our favorite things, but it does feel like we're getting very, very close to the World Cup. It's under 2 months? 2 months away? How can that be?
It's so weird. I went to a wedding this weekend. I had a lot of conversations. People were like, oh, what's your plans in the fall and the winter and where are you going to be? And I was like, well, I guess from November 18th to December 18th, I'm going to be watching soccer for like 8 hours a day, every single day. And it kind of just hit me that it was happening this year. I'm pretty stoked.
Sean, what's the temperature check right now for World Cup fever?
It's pretty good. I would say that we are definitely in peak Toronto summer. You can feel the heat off of the sidewalks. It's good. The panini packs are getting ripped open left, right, and center. I've got another box on its way. Things are good. So the heat check is sizzling, but I still think it'll pick up as we get closer.
Devang, do you do panini stickers?
I don't. I was talking to SK about this offline, but I used to be really into cards, but I kind of stopped that. And panini I never really got into, but my friends out west in Vancouver really tried hard to get me into it, and I kind of shook them away. I'm easily addicted to things as a former cigarette smoker. I know what would happen to me, so I'm worried. I'm worried what would happen.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that makes sense. I was asking because Sean has so much energy when he texts us about it, and I don't really feel the same. So I was just making sure that both of us felt that way.
Well, I'm just a good person, so I humor him. I'm like, whoa, look at this pack. That's amazing. I got all the reactions down. But it is that time of year. If you had told kid me that I'd be super amped for a friendly against Qatar like 15 years ago or beyond, they would have been like, what happened to you? What hellscape do we live in? But no, it's happening. The games are coming thick and fast. And we talked to Josh about everything Canadian men's national team. So look forward to that chat. Before we get there, though, a reminder, we are on patreon.com/a football podcast. We have a very new patron, Mel S. Thank you so much for your support. Saw you jump into the Discord over the weekend. Can't wait for you to chat with the gang. David, big shouts to Mel.
Yeah, I assume this is Mel Brooks, who just signed up for our Discord. So super excited to have you in there. And but either way, I hope you enjoy it. You get the show ad free, you get the show early, and you get to hang out with us in the Discord, which is a lot of fun. You get all your Ask AFP questions in. So for anyone else out there thinking, what's Mel's life about to be like? That's just a little window, and you could be that person too.
Be like Mel S. and the rest of our wonderful supporters, and head on over to patreon.com/a football podcast and support us today. I have a feeling the Discord will be bumping during these friendlies, DG, as we're operating in different time zones and trying to find these games on whatever dubious stream we can find. The Discord's going to be a good place. So do like Mel and join us at patreon.com/a football podcast. When we come back after the break, the playoff picture in MLS gets slightly clearer, plus some other bits and bobs from around the league.
Going forward's not a bad thing. Yes, sir. Like this. Edwards working on Rosenberry. Edwards trying to turn the corner. He'll slow it up a bit. Has some support with Grans here. Puts it on his right. Onto his left. Has a goal. Scores! 2-0 in favor of the LA Galaxy in the 28th minute.
Ladies and gentlemen, Raheem Edwards taking bodies. Raheem the Dream, you love to see it. The LA Galaxy really needed that result over the Rapids, so let's start there. In the West, as we look at their playoff picture, DGI have received some backlash after confidently claiming the playoffs are set. We know the 7 teams in the East. We likely know the 7 teams in the West. That's apparently not the case, but an LA team that has been thoroughly uninspiring at times, lackadaisical, not quite clicking together, more just a collection of players rather than a team. They got a result, and I think it's not entirely Puig related, but it's 80%. Is that too much? Is this addition been heralded enough for what it's meant to the Galaxy? Because I feel like his ability to hit the ground running has kept LA from falling out of this race.
I don't think 80% is too much. Their PR team's been peppering me with Ricky Puig facts since he joined the league, and since he started, he with Hani Mukhtar has the most goal/assist combined in the league. He leads the league in passes completed as well. So he is that influential, and he's that influential across the league, therefore even more so to the LA Galaxy. And I think it's fair to put that number on it. That goal started running, and I was trying to figure out the connection between Sean K and that goal, and then I realized it was Raheem Edwards. I was like, Sean doesn't normally pick a random LA Galaxy goal against the Rapids for us to use as a drop, and then I realized which goal it was in that game. And so just so I can remember, last week you said the 7 teams that are in are the 7 teams that are in on both sides.
I think I was less definitive in the West, but in the East, I made some shocking claims.
I'm fine with that because I have made some shocking claims as well. One of them took a huge hit this weekend. I kind of was
We're going to get to that.
I think
we're going to get to that,
okay.
By the way, David. We're
Okay.
going to get to your shocking miss. Yeah.
Okay, so in the West, though,
yeah.
There's so many 6-pointers and weird games like this that I guess it's pretty safe to say we won't know till the last game, till decision day.
My next question was this. I mean, you would think a result against San Jose this weekend puts them in a really good spot against RSL, but I could see them completely not showing up for that RSL match. That's just the year it's kind of been. Although the penalty snafu and the mid-season lull and everything that we've seen from LA so far, it's not like the other teams in the West haven't really gone through that themselves, even your LAFCs, even if that time period might have been shorter. But I feel foolish trying to bet against the Galaxy at this point of the season, even after watching them lose 3-0 to Vancouver. Like results like that, I'm willing to not look over, but I can see them finding it really late and just going on a run. But I feel like that could be said for half the teams.
I think so. I mean, Vancouver proved it last week, right? Like Vancouver a week ago, we did a heat check thing, and I put them in a freezer. I buried the freezer. The freezer then fell to the bottom of the ocean. Like I didn't even want to talk about it. And then they win 2 games against these teams, and they put themselves back at least in ownership of their own identity. I actually think there's a better chance the Galaxy lose to San Jose than beat San Jose and don't make the playoffs. Like this game, when you look at SKC knocking off Minnesota this weekend, when you look at the way DC United played at times, and obviously a whole other mess in that game against Inter Miami, I just think San Jose has nothing to play for. They are supposedly going to sell out Stanford Stadium against their biggest rival on a weekend when no one else is playing and everyone's watching them. Like they are the ones with a, nothing to lose, everything to win mentality in that game. So I wouldn't be shocked if the Galaxy drop points in that game and they're not in control of their own destiny as they go through these final few games.
Just like I said, it'd be foolish betting against them. It'd be foolish betting with them. So I'm with you there. I don't feel good. I don't feel good about the LA Galaxy at all. And I'm a GV Greg Vanney stan, but it's been that type of year. You talked about them, David, the Whitecaps. What a week. I mean, we legit buried them, left them for dead. Didn't call 911. It was bad. But here we are looking at them beating the Galaxy and the Sounders in back-to-back games. There's a chance if they beat Austin and Minnesota, RSL and LA play head-to-head, which helps them. Probably too little too late, but being able to maybe torpedo the Sounders' chance of making the playoffs has to feel good.
Yeah, I would assume so. And I would assume if they can win one of the next 2 games, at a minimum, it probably saves any questions around Vanni Sartini, if not his job. And I don't know if it's on the line. And I think probably secures for most people are like, yeah, when it was all together, it works. Let's see what a full offseason with Kubas and Schopf and Gressel looks like. And that doesn't mean they're not going to try and upgrade the roster and move pieces around. But I think in general, this core will come back and Sartini will be back if they can win one more game. And that would probably put them in a place where they are still alive on decision day, which is as much as you can ask for based off where they were coming from. I do still walk away from this week and say it's so opponent based. They can't change the way they play. Galaxy were set up perfect for them. A team that wants to possess, that's open on the counter. And Seattle, the way they played was as well, especially with the defensive deficiencies with no João Paulo and no Christian Roldan in midfield. So I don't feel differently about who Vancouver is, but it's good to see them, perform the way they can in a big moment. And as you said, like, they still need to sort of let Cascadian know they are a part of that rivalry because they haven't been relevant in such a long time.
And another positive, I feel like Pedro Vite has at least ensured a strong look next season, and it'd be foolish to cash out on the 20-year-old Ecuadorian at this point. I think he's been showing enough glimpses for Vanni Sartini to be interested in what he can offer next season. It hasn't been super consistent, David, but there's glimpses there of a game-breaking player that it would be a fine for Vancouver if they found him 2 years later. If you know what I'm saying. Like, I think the fact that they have him now, the patience is required here, and he's paying dividends.
Yeah, he's definitely earned his spot. He's shown he can fit into Sartini's system, which I think is huge. And I think what I remember over the last 2 years between him and Diber Caicedo and Dahome, you thought there was all these 10s in there and all this creative attacking talent. And Dahome's played a little at wingback, and Caicedo's been hurt, and Veach hadn't performed at all. So I think to get some production out of one of those spots is massive. And as you said, again, he will definitely be a part of the plans next year, which potentially changes what you're doing with Lucas Cavallini's DP spot, because maybe you don't need the same attacking piece. Maybe you use it on a center back because you say, we have Gold, we have White, we have Vite, we have Gressel. Like, maybe there's enough there.
Do you think Lucas Cavallini plays or starts again this season?
No, there's no way they start him. I just couldn't. Maybe I'm wrong. You guys can push back, but I just don't see how you start him in the final 2 games of the season unless like 15 people get injured.
Which has happened before to Vancouver, so you never know. Rounding out the Western Conference, maybe the reason I was giving the Galaxy so much hope was RSL, who I think falling off a cliff might be charitable, David. 3 wins in the last 16 matches. The second half of the season, obviously not matching the first half. Is there a major reason why, or is this regression to the mean?
Yeah, I say this a lot. Goals cost money. There's only so much you can do. You can find really great defense. It's easier to stop attack than create attack. But at some point, normally, the high expensive goal scorers will score, and the players who don't have a proven track record, which is why they don't cost as much, don't. And that's sort of what it feels like with RSL. I will say in this game and a couple of the games recently, it also then feels like Pablo Mastroeni's actually panicked in trying to find something. And he made changes at halftime in this game that I didn't think made any sense. He's moved Aaron Herrera around a little bit, which I don't think has been necessary. And I think a lot of that has been trying to find something, and it's actually thrown them off. Rather than when you look early in the season, they would have grinded those games, and then Andrew Brody gave them a late goal, or Tate Schmidt came off the bench and gave them a late goal. You got to be at tied or 1 goal difference to get at the end of the game to get to that. And I think Pablo Mastroeni's kind of panicked a little bit earlier in the whole, this again. Let me try and throw the dice and see if I can figure something out.
Cincinnati looked good. Cincinnati has looked good for a while. And if you look to the east, where I mentioned I was quite confident in the Crew, yikes. The Eastern Conference now looks a bit more settled except for that final spot. I mean, Cincinnati, David, it all paid off, right? Outside of the Vasquez snub for the USMNT, which we could get to, but after trials and tribulations to start their MLS journey, this team looks pretty dang good and looks pretty... I don't want to say formidable, because I think if you're a playoff team, you are you got some good qualities about yourselves, but I think Cincinnati has the ability to make a run. And it's the Miazga edition. It's Vasquez doing his thing. I feel pretty hopeful about this group.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're a fun playoff team because of what they did against RSL. I think they were the worst team on the road in tough conditions for 65, 70 minutes, and they won 2-1 because the three best attacking players on the field play for them. Nwabodo's elite at defensive midfield. Miazga, a couple mistakes, obviously the one on the penalty kick that leads to the Celentano save, but otherwise he's been a pretty big addition. So I agree with you. And, I've talked about it a lot this week, but like they just made not basic, I don't want to undermine it, but they just made MLS moves. Like you need to have a good D mid, Nwabodo, DP, done. You need to have an experienced center back who can cover ground. Miazga, done. Don't waste an international spot on a goalkeeper. Celentano, draft pick, done. Alec Khan, signed, done. Like this, there's a reason blueprints exist in all sports and all leagues. And FC Cincinnati's decided to sort of put their head in the sand and walk in the other direction for 3 years, and it's been a train wreck. Chris Albright comes in, and I already put them in the playoffs 2 weeks ago. I already congratulated them. They're going to make the playoffs. Wow. And they could, honestly, they could be fourth in the Eastern Conference.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't shock me with the way their schedule comes towards the end. They could host a game too. They could sneak up to fifth. They still have a game in hand on NYCFC, and they are 4 points behind.
NYCFC Orlando not inspiring a ton of confidence in league play either. So I could definitely see that. Let's move to the Caleb Porter Bowl, where Columbus did their thing, and their thing is capitulating late in hilarious circumstance. I wonder, DG, if we're getting to the end of Porter time in Columbus, because I mean, looking around them, namely Inter Miami, who we'll talk about, missing the playoffs with the investment that's been made, with the roster they have, that seems untenable to me.
It just, how much do you get for an MLS Cup? How much do you get for being a young local coach? Like, do you think Caleb Porter would have already been fired if they hadn't won MLS Cup and he's already used that capital, or is this the year he uses that capital?
It's a great question. I feel like Bez is not someone to wait for a moment when he has to do the sad thing and maybe do what's best for everyone and cut ties. I think he's a forward-thinking person who could understand that they shouldn't rest on that victory, though it was massive.
I think that's fair. I also, their relationship has always been interesting to me because they got hired at the same time, and often a GM wants to hire their coach. And so I've always, well, I don't know the inside of that, and I have no knowledge for or against it. I don't know what their relationship is, and maybe this is a way for Bez to get out of it, quite honestly, if that's really what he thinks. And maybe, Jason Bent comes in, or someone who, he has more experience with and has been around longer, or maybe Craig Vanny, if they let Galaxy continue their season. But I wouldn't be shocked either way, I guess I would say. And I talked about this with a few people. I don't know what's next for him. I believe that Caleb Porter would get another job in MLS. People are frustrated with him. He has his personality comes off in a specific way, and he's been around for a while. So he probably has a lot of people that wouldn't want to work with him, but I still think his background and his experience is rare because there are not great options when you look out and say, I'd like a coach who has MLS head coaching experience already, but someone who's not from 10 to 15 years ago when the league was different. I don't really see a long list there, and I think Caleb Porter would now be on the top of it.
Guys, before we move on, I just think the utter disrespect of the Campeones Cup. When is Caleb Porter cashing in, I won the Campeones Cup? That's the big question. That's where he's got to go. Bez, I won the Campeones Cup.
2 trophies in 2 years.
Yeah.
It's true.
3 if you count.
David, the family group chat must have exploded this weekend because dear brother Gonzalo is doing it again. Gonzalo Higuain putting Inter Miami on his back.
I was like, my family group chat did blow up this weekend. Where is Devang in all of this?
It got 40% creepy, but no, Gonzalo Higuain, David Goss, doppelganger, putting Inter Miami on his back against Columbus midweek with 2 goals, and then at the very end against DC United for 3 huge points. The little engine that could. I'm not going to try and paint Inter Miami as an underdog story, but I do think this season has been fascinating, and I've said unkind things about Phil Neville in terms of like, why did he get this job, or like, friends helping friends, etc. But I do enjoy David, him finding his way in a league that's still clearly taking some adjusting to, and you can't just waltz in here and say you're a Neville and get all the things you want. I think he's done this the relatively hard way, and for them to make the playoffs would be a nice story.
It would be. And there's no award for this because there is one for newcomer, but Pozuelo has to be the transaction of the year. $150,000 in allocation money for the franchise changing player to potentially power you to a first, and I'm just going to say it, real playoff spot. Being 10th in 2020 doesn't count as a playoff spot for Inter Miami. So this would be their first one. Like it, and he has revitalized Higuain. There is no doubt about it that a lot of what we're seeing from Gonzalo Higuain is because he gets to play now with a true elite visionary playmaker, a player on his level in Alejandro Pozuelo. And now with Campana back, there's flexibility of how you can use them. I have them in the playoffs. I said it after they beat Columbus that they had done the work and it was over, and they made it a little scary against DC, and I probably should stop saying stuff like this. But I have them and Cincinnati in the postseason now.
Well, Paz has to come back to BMO Field for another regular season game, so he might score 40 goals in that game alone based on his current trajectory. And I don't think there has been a more impactful mid-season addition, especially within the league. League transaction, he's got to be up there, and I feel like he has to be a part of their future if he wants to stay, which I feel like it seems like he's a bit more comfortable in Miami, and it looks like this change of scenery is suiting him well. Anything else before we mosey on to the interview with Josh Kloke, David? I know there's a lot of games coming thick and fast.
No, I think behind that San Jose game, Seattle hosts FC Cincinnati next week. That's also a makeup to put everyone close to even games. And then we've got 2 more to come the week after. That's a massive game. Must win, obviously, for Seattle, but Cincinnati, what they showed at RSL, like they can go steal points in that one when everyone else is at home. And that's what I said. If let's say they win that game, they're a point behind NYCFC. Cincinnati, I'm pretty sure, closes out with 2 teams that are not in the playoffs after that game, while NYCFC still, I believe, has to play Inter Miami. So they could host the playoff game, which is absurd and epic. And yeah, besides that, 22 under 22, Devang, you ready to do 45 minutes?
I know you and Sean are. I will say I'm glad during these international windows, the single games that we do have on have massive playoff stakes.
Yeah,
that's always fun.
How brutal would Houston, Colorado be next week?
Good Lord. Thank you. I'm so glad. All right. When we come back after the break, the Athletics' Josh Kloke talks to us about his new book, The Voyageurs, the Canadian men's soccer team's quest to reach the World Cup. It's a great chat. We dig deep into the 86 team, the road to 2022, and the road forward from there. Hope you enjoy it. Coming up next.
There'll be no stoppage time. In your wildest dreams, from obscurity to unforgettable, this is the moment the country has waited for. The Kings of the North, they've done it. Canada is going to the World Cup.
March 27th, 2022. What a night for Canadian soccer. I nearly teared up again just listening to that. That's how
chills,
incredible the
man.
party was. One of the greatest moments in soccer history in this country, one of the greatest moments, period, I think, in this country. And we're lucky today, this week, to be joined by author Joshua Kloke. He has penned The Voyageurs, the Canadian men's soccer team's quest to reach the World Cup. Josh, of course, has been on this show before. What a time for this book to come out. Josh, thanks so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just, you're right. Just listening back to that again. I mean, I was in the press box, and I remember asking Wheeler, like Gareth Wheeler, if he knew what he was going to say, and listening, like when they qualified, and listening back to it now, it kind of feels like he, like the rest of us, was in a state of disbelief. Yeah. Like, is this actually happening? And I kind of kept thinking about that, like as I was writing the book, because I did the majority of it, like through that final round of qualifying over that 7 months or whatever. And like, you just, there were so many times where I had to stop myself. I would do most of my writing at like 5 o'clock in the morning, and I'd have to stop myself and like kind of convince myself that it wasn't a dream. Mm-hmm. Like this was actually happening, because it's wild just to think about now that, you know, we're probably going to be debating the 24th, 25th guys on the roster. Whereas like 3 years ago, we would have taken anything to just be included in the conversation. Right. So you're right. It's wild to just listen back to that too.
We're going to go back deeper into Canadian soccer history, but just to go back a few months after that result in Costa Rica, it wasn't completely great feelings here until that Jamaica game was done. So I think that release and that elation was just getting that out of the way, and it was comfortable and comprehensive in hindsight. But I wanted to talk, Josh, about maybe your story or in this, because I think you do a great job chronicling the rise of the Canadian men and from 1986 to today. But how did you find yourself wanting to write about Canadian soccer and the national team? What made you want to chronicle this story?
Well, I mean, first of all, I appreciate that. I do. I think, you know, I grew up and still do cheer for the German national team. My grandparents came over on a boat from Germany in 1954, and the first game I ever remember watching was the 1990 World Cup final, sitting on my grandparents' ugly green carpet on the floor. And I just remember kind of, as I got a little bit older, I remember going to watch the men's national team. I don't know if either of you guys would have gone. They did this 3-team tournament with Denmark and Portugal in 1993 at the Sky Dome. And I went with my dad, and we sat way back up in the 500s, and this team, this national team, just like literally just seemed like a mirage to me. So I guess growing up, I never really knew a lot about the Canadian men's national team. I think there were points where I like wondered if they even were competing. And I think as I got older, I realized, I mean that, I think as I got older, and kind of started to learn about the tournaments and the qualifying that they would play in, I realized, you know, not what a travesty that was, but just how unfortunate that is, that, you know, there's young soccer fans out there that maybe don't have an allegiance, kind of ingrained in them like I did, you know, with the German national team. And, you know, it's kind of unfortunate. And so I think, you know, you grow up playing the game, you love the game. And, you know, you guys would have read the chapter in the book on, you know, some of the Canadian soccer media members and what they did to kind of forge a path for the sport. And they all said the same thing. You do it because you love it. Some people cover different sports because their editor assigns them that. But I think the one thing that, you know, anybody that's written about soccer or covers soccer in any way, still, they do it because they love the sport, as cliche and hokey as that sounds. But for me, it's the truth.
Yeah, Josh, we met, I think it was at Chivas TFC, and I just remember thinking that was the coolest experience of my life. And all the reporters coming from Toronto, yourself, John, and Kurt, and the fire outside the stadium. And it was just like everything I had ever wanted to experience. And I see in your story, similar to mine, of like this quirky love of this game and sort of what it can be around the world. Let's talk about the book a little more, because I learned probably a lot more than all of the rest of the people on this show about a lot of things from reading it. But you start with the 1986 World Cup team, And it's funny, a trope that's become really popular in the US, and I think it will be over the course of this year in Canada as well, is this like, oh my God, a kid from X place that's near me playing against X giant player, right? Brendan Aronson's from Medford, New Jersey, and now he's on the field against Chelsea. How could this possibly be? But that's sort of the picture that is painted from the players themselves at the 1986 team, standing next to Michel Platini and getting ready to play against France. What was it like sort of hearing all their stories and sort of reliving that through them now all these years later, especially where Canadian soccer now sits finally after a long layoff from the World Cup?
Yeah, they all talk about the tunnel and being in the tunnel, in the lead up to that first game in Mexico, the blinding heat, midday heat playing in Mexico. And these guys, a lot of them were not full-time outdoor players at the time. A lot of these guys earned their paycheck playing indoor soccer, right? That was kind of in vogue at the time. The NASL isn't what it used to be during its heyday in the 70s. So this is a team that were semi-pro in a lot of ways. And some of the guys like, a Bob Lenarduzzi, who had a level of experience, he would have known who some of these guys were. But a lot of these guys, like, your starting goalkeeper, Paul Dolan, he's literally playing for a team called the Edmonton Brickmen. And like, you're staring up, some of literally the greatest players in the world. So I think it was that point standing in the tunnel where it all became very real, right? That I think, as dutifully as they would have prepared, nothing can you really prepare you for taking the field against the reigning European champions. So I think there was a lot of that. But the good thing about that, and I guess maybe the parallels between that team and this 2022 team is, they weren't afraid, right? Because they didn't have to be. There was no pressure to perform. You talk to the people on this 2022 team, but they can go to Qatar and they cannot feel like the weight of the world is on their shoulders because the whole country is just happy to be there. And it feels like it's the start of something. 1986, I mean, they were not expected to be there. I remember finding some old odds makers lists. They were by far the least likely to not just win a game, but score a goal. And, they didn't end up scoring a goal. So that element of having no fear and not being afraid of the opposition, that was evident, and I rewatched that opening game against France multiple times. It was wild. And I encourage anyone to just, to do that. But you could see that they just tried to run France into the ground. And, for 80 minutes, they did. I think that's worth remembering here is that, especially as Canada, prepares to play Belgium, it's not impossible that Canada could get a result because they were really close to getting one before too, right? When you embody that kind of no fear attitude.
Josh, did you in your research come across were there any fans there, and what the perception in Canada at the time was of like watching the tournament?
So I was told this, and I guess this is a little Easter egg or nugget or whatever. I was told this, and I couldn't really nail it down, but I was told that there were so few Canadian fans that in the 2 hours in the lead up to the game, World Cup organizers, World Cup representatives were standing outside the stadiums and handing out Canadian flags because they didn't want it to look like there were just 10 people waving a flag, and they were handing out ponchos and they were handing out pieces of red paraphernalia to kind of bolster the appearance. I'll be honest, that was one that was kind of a bit of a, hearsay, and I couldn't really nail that down. But look, I've had people tell me that no, there wasn't fans. There were people pretending to be Canadian fans there, which I suppose speaks to where things were at for interest in the team in 1986, right?
I wonder if that might be possible in Qatar too, based on some of the travel issues and launching. We could get some fake flags again. Josh, you mentioned the similarities between the 86 team and the 2022 team, and I think talent is the biggest differentiator. But I look at the coaches, and I do see they're cut from a similar cloth. And Tony Waiters and where he came from and what John Herdman is doing now, I found that kind of interwoven narrative very interesting.
Yeah, there are a lot of similarities because, Tony Waiters was a player that really wanted to instill a specific style of play in this Canadian team. He recognized that this team didn't have a ton of talent, so he just wanted them to be the fittest team there, and he wanted them to just run the other teams into the ground. Maybe get a lucky break off a set piece. That didn't necessarily happen, but he was an expert motivator, right? He understood the plight of the Canadian player. I mean, it's worth noting that Tony Waiters literally took the bonus he got from qualifying for the World Cup and invested it back into the soccer ecosystem by investing in the Vancouver 86ers, right? The CSL team that would eventually be formed after the World Cup, right? So he believed in the future of Canadian soccer much in the same way that John Herdman does. And he was able to kind of galvanize and motivate his players with some pretty rousing, speeches, much in the way John Herdman does. And perhaps he had a different kind of sense of humor than John Herdman. One of my favorite stories that I uncovered was how he purposefully, in his team talk before the French game, when he was going through video of the opposition, he purposefully butchered, players' names purposefully just to get a laugh out of his teammates and or his players, and to put them at ease, to make them realize that these guys on the other end, they're just humans, and we don't have to fear them. So yeah, again, that element of not being afraid of the opposition, I think, is something that both Waiters and John Herdman both really try to instill in their players.
Call him Kevin De Bruyne. Call him Thibaut Courtois. Call him Christian Benteke. Do not call them by their names, John Herdman. I dare you to do it. I love that so much. That was one of the best parts of that chapter. Let's look over then from, we talked 1986 all the way to now. And there's some highs, 2000. Of course, I felt like from my watching experience, and then again, reading the book, 2007. And then obviously a ton of lows, a lot of them happening in Honduras, a lot of them by score lines we won't mention here. When you were going through this and sort of charting the big moments, the tipping points up and down, what sort of stood out to you of now looking back, how we got to where we are now?
Yeah, well, man, I'm glad you mentioned 2007. I think that was probably an underappreciated time in the men's national team's recent history. And look, there's not a lot of bright spots, but that was one of them, because this is when Stephen Hart takes over the national team on an interim basis and goes to a Gold Cup, and is able to talk to players on that team, and that Atiba Hutchinson was on that team, and people still call that, outside of this 2022 team, the most talented team in men's team history. They had a midfield of the Rosario, de Guzman, and Atiba Hutchinson, players in their prime that could move the ball so well. And you go and you rewatch some of the goals they scored. It's very, kind of tiki-taka in vogue at the time. But the way that Stephen Hart was able to get his players to, kind of move away from the Canadian mentality of the past, which was, lump it forward, hope for the best, a very kind of English British style of play. And Stephen Hart kind of really tried to look at the multicultural influence in all of his players and say, how do we embody that? Right? How do we kind of take all these different influences that all these players have ingrained and not run from it, but say, look, okay, you come from this place, you grew up in this place, and you have this style of play. You like a little bit more flair on the ball. Good, let's use that, right? You come from a soccer culture that likes to dribble more, likes to run more. Good, let's use that. Let's embody flair and multiculturalism in a way that Canadian teams haven't in the past. I think that was a real big turning point from the team, because it was the start of the team just realizing that they could just play. They didn't have to play defensively. They could just play. But that time is also, 2007 is also, really, really important, because it's the start of MLS in Canada, right? Like, this is, I think, if you were to look at the turning point in terms of the success of the men's national team, it's getting, like, you had the CSL, but the CSL folded. It's getting a bona fide league in Canada, establishing an academy pipeline. So there are places for young players to play. There's professional opportunities. Like, this is still a really new experience. I think that's important to remember, right? 2007 is not a long time ago, but this provides, like, you can start to see the proof, right? You can, when Ashton Morgan becomes the first MLS Academy player from Canada to get a call up from the national team, you can see the pipeline. And Ashton Morgan had a good, not necessarily great career, but there was proof there that players could go from Canada, stay in Canada. And, you know, what I would hear from really successful, talented players in the 90s was that they had the talent. There were so many players like them in Canada, but if there's nowhere to play in Canada and you can't, you know, strike it lucky with a connection in Europe, what are you going to do? You're probably going to walk away from the game, right? The book is filled with stories of players who were, you know, working full-time jobs and trying to keep their national team careers alive because that's just what you had to do. And that's only in the 90s. That's not that long ago. So I guess the point is once MLS comes in and there are real opportunities, real professional opportunities, you keep the best players in the game, and that kind of, that trickles upwards, right? The national team benefits from that.
I thought that chapter was extremely powerful, and Ian Hume kind of acknowledging that there was a transition underway, but it could have been a lot quicker if that Hart regime was allowed to stay in place and keep going. And, if a certain call was made correctly, cough, I'm not pointing any fingers, but I think we still hold some pretty massive grudges about that game.
You read the Jakarta method. You know how we operate. Come on.
I assume the CIA was involved, to be honest, based on what I saw there. Yeah. But to get back to the book, I think you hit on something that I wanted to touch on, that moment, maybe the biggest reason why we find ourselves here today and the reason Canada is preparing to go to a World Cup, that turning point. But I think MLS arriving in Canada, it's hard to argue against, David. I'm not sure what you think.
No, I loved hearing Josh say that because I've sort of been saying the same thing. And it's interesting. I think the first time I really watched Canada was 2007. So there was a weird expectation from me for a number of years of like underperforming, but being confused by it. And I'm sure Canadian fans are shocked by me. Wow. They've been let down for longer than me. But I felt like it was coming earlier than most people. And I think that's part of, you know, us working together and me getting to know all of you outside of this show was because I was sort of really intrigued by what I was watching in Canada. And it always felt like to me that a huge part of it was that you now had a pipeline in Montreal, in Toronto, and in Vancouver that were spreading out across the country to produce players, to give them an opportunity to let you see the pro game at a higher level. And of course, for a place to settle. And I think we've done it before on the show where you just go through every player. If MLS doesn't exist, what is Kamal Miller's career right now, right? What is Alistair Johnston's? When does Alphonso Davies become a professional? Like, it's so clear when you look at this team almost from top to bottom outside of a guy like Atiba who just took the risk on his own and had to deal with it pre-MLS. It's just so clear the impact that it had. And the other thing I'd say about what you talked about with Stephen Hart and that international background is soccer's an emotional sport. And I think if players don't feel like they can represent themselves and be who they are, they can't play at their best. And I think Canada national team has always been fairly probably ethnic as whatever you'd call it, but it was mainly Balkan and Eastern European and German and English and Scottish up until this generation. Now you look at a team that I think embodies really Canada to its core, and that's why these players have been able to play at the level they play at.
Well, and you look too, and without, you know, leaning too heavily on the, I guess, educational aspect of it all, but look, there was a point in Canada's history where the doors were just swung open and immigration became a national policy, right? So you have waves and waves of people coming to Canada, populating Canada, and bringing that love of soccer from abroad. And then they have kids. And then, you know, once those kids kind of start playing soccer, you notice a shift. And I wrote about this in the book. In 1992, hockey is by far the most popular team sport to play. And it's not that long. It's 2005. And that's something I didn't kind of necessarily see happening when I set out to write the book, going through these statistics, because they really do prove that, you know, by 2005, soccer is the most popular team sport in the country. And so now among children under 16, and then you just see again, the knock-on effect of that is there's more and more kids playing. So there's more and more talent. The cream kind of rises to the top. And that, I think we're kind of seeing the proof of that right now, because look, I mean, what's the soccer capital of Canada? It's Brampton. And what is Brampton also known for is being one of the most populated cities with immigrants from around the world. Look at the list of players on this national team who came from Brampton, and you look at their diverse background, right? Junior Hoylett with Jamaican parents, Tajon Buchanan with parents from outside Canada, Daniil Henry, like the list goes on and on. Jonathan Osorio, parents from Colombia, right? What we're kind of seeing is the proof of that. And I really do hope, without getting too heavy or whatever, I really do hope that that's a takeaway people have from this book, is that, you know, open borders, immigration, multiculturalism, these are really important things to building the kind of backbone of the country. And I think if we look at this 2022 team, I hope it's more representative of the Canada you see walking down the street in most cities in Canada in a way that maybe it wasn't in 1986. This is going to be a diverse looking team. And I really hope that those diverse backgrounds are genuinely celebrated come November.
Just even thinking personally, the people in charge of the soccer academies growing up, they were all mainly either European or English or from a certain background, like I think the makeup of those teams back then, and then seeing that change as well in the soccer clubs around the GTA and Ontario and across Canada. I think that's a great sign that what we're hoping for does come to fruition.
And that to me was actually what I was going to say, Devang, is that last piece, which is, okay, so what's the value of MLS or, you know, the high level USL teams that Montreal and Vancouver were, is as those players retire, they become coaches, they become executives, they become agents. You've expanded the growth of the game, and you've done it from people from those backgrounds. And that's the part that we haven't totally hit on. And I think in a way, Canada, and obviously coming from a US perspective, is a little different, where like all our coaches are MLS coaches. You have John Herdman, who's not, but it's still the infrastructure, the knowledge of the game has grown so much in every corner of the country, because you have these players and these former pros and former semi-pros and assistant coaches and, you know, athletic trainers and all of that just builds the sport out across communities.
Before we get to the current camp, Josh, I wanted to ask you big picture stuff, and I know a lot of eyeballs are already being directed toward 2026 and when the World Cup will come to Canada, and perhaps this team will be a bit further along in the evolution where they're thinking about making some waves there. But I think what I realized as well reading this book is for all the plans that we may have and what may be the thought process, things can change really quickly. You know, I look at John Herdman as being really the key of this phase of the Canadian national team. Is this John Herdman's squad going into 2026? Is this kind of the vision going forward, or did you get a sense of that?
Yeah, I think this is John Herdman's squad as long as he'd like it to be. I mean that, like, there's no person that has been more instrumental to this team getting to 2022. No single person than John Herdman. And that's not just in the way that's not just in his tactics. It's the way he motivates players. It's the way he fundraises behind closed doors. It's the way that he galvanizes this team and has them believe in like literally going to 2022. I've talked to national team players, and I heard this great story. I wish it was able to get in the book, but I heard it after, you know, I had to file it. During John Herdman's first meeting with the team in 2018, the whole thing was videotaped unbeknownst to players. And John Herdman says to his entire team, I'm here to get you to 2022. And I think we all remember what the men's national team was like in 2018. And there's a player, I'm going to write about it, I don't want to say who yet, but there's a player that literally started laughing. And he's caught on video doing this. And he's still a national team player today. So that kind of speaks to, look, and it's kind of in a state of disbelief. The point is that after Canada does qualify and they go to their final game in Panama, John Herdman showed that video again to his team, and he showed kind of some of the faces, the reactions. the point is that John Herdman believed when no one else kind of did. So I think he can keep this team as long as he wants. And I think the appeal of a home World Cup is something he's talked about a lot. And I think he's only just kind of getting started. I think there are so many talented young players coming up that could really benefit from John Herdman. But, and it's a big but, if Canada goes to the World Cup, if Canada goes to the World Cup, and these are whispers that are growing ever so louder. I had someone with the men's national team, literally moments after they qualified against Jamaica, I had someone tell me, John Herdman is a fantastic coach and we should be happy, as long as he stays here. So it's something I think that is on the mind of some, is because look, like I said, let's say, they get a result against Croatia. Let's say they beat Croatia, which is not entirely unfathomable. Do more and more clubs around the world say, right, hold on, what is the secret sauce that this guy is cooking with, and how do we get it? And do we have more money to pay him than the CSA? And the answer is probably yes. No, I'm not saying he jumps at the first opportunity. I'm not saying that at all. What I am saying is that if the results come like they might, John Herdman is bound to get offers. And, John Herdman, we forget, or maybe we shouldn't forget, he came from very kind of humble beginnings working in football development in New Zealand, right? This is not the final stop for John Herdman. I think he aspires to be coaching at the very highest level and to be motivating the best players in the world. So we'll see.
We've had this debate a few times on this show because I do think it is really interesting. I've made the case for why both parties maybe shouldn't continue on after this one. But I think what you said makes sense, that if he wants to be there, it's his job. There is not a huge history of coaches being successful over 2 cycles. That sort of was one of my points. And then my question with Herdman would be, okay, if it's a national team point of view, what's the better job than Canada being a home World Cup team? Because let's be real, he's not going to be the England national team coach. But I could see club situation stepping in there.
I don't think Gareth Southgate would confirm that at all.
But would they replace him with John Herdman?
If he does what Josh is saying at the World Cup, though, and has a blinder, I think the idea that he has a really good World Cup in the sense that Canada does better than expected, and it opens him up to jobs we weren't expecting him to be up for, I think that's entirely possible. Maybe not England, but
what about like a mid-range? I hate using that term, but like the names that I keep thinking about, and I'm not saying I have no information to suggest this, but like, what about a Wales? What about a Scotland? What about a team that he has maybe a different connection with, a team that, Wales is in the World Cup and they're an inspiring story on their own. But, a country like a Scotland where there's an infrastructure there and there's a passion for the sport, there's probably a bigger budget too. Because what John Herdman has proven is that he can build things. So if you're a country that maybe has some pieces, but needs to kind of get over the hump, that's what I wondered. And we haven't even gone to the World Cup yet, and we're talking about this. It's crazy, but all right. But this is where we're at.
I've got the 2-0 win over Belgium fanfic ready to go, guys. So just let me know if you want me to start saying how that happened. Let's talk about the current games, because we do have some matches to talk about. DG, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, let's just add that as the latest chapter in the book just already. But I'm going to do the same. Devang, you're right. So, Josh, let's talk about this window. What is the purpose of these 2 games? Like, what is the ultimate goal for Canada that they had a good 2 weeks with these 2 friendlies against Qatar and Uruguay in Europe?
Yeah, for me, there's 2 things that I think are probably the focus in this window. First of all, it's some of these kind of bubble players deciding who's in and who's out. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I was doing my list. I feel like I do my list every day, but like I've got 22 players that to me are locks to go to Qatar. So there's just a few spots left, and there's some players on the bubble that could use this window to either solidify their spot or, maybe with a poor performance fall out. And, these are the Joel Watermans, Luca Koleosho, even like a Liam Millar, who I think does end up getting there, but really needs to kind of prove himself that he's in that attacking kind of fold. So that's one of them, is which players are going to separate from the pack and which aren't. Two, look, the June window, we talked briefly about it. There were some things we learned, but mostly it was a wash for a variety of reasons. This is such a pivotal window for John Herdman to get his squad playing with the kind of harmony, showing synergy kind of tactically that they did, and that tactical fluidity that they had in spades through qualifying. Because what you don't want is to leave this window with more questions than you had before, right? You literally want to leave this international window on a high, so that when you get back together in November, you feel good about where you're at. If that's a draw against Uruguay and it's done in a way that, players are connecting and, they can shift from a 4-4-2 to a 3-4-3 really well. Those are the kind of things that I'm looking for, not necessarily to regain the form that they had against Mexico and Edmonton, but it's just to show that togetherness on the pitch, so that when they leave, it's not like, yeah, we could have done better, right? You want to just build that confidence so that come November, you just feel good about where you're at as a group.
About some of the newcomers and Joel Waterman, who I think is one of the ultimate success stories in terms of the pathway and what the CPL has meant. But I'm curious about Kolosho. Do you think this is a legit opportunity to make the squad in November, or is it a possible we want to cap you, we want to cap tie you and get you as a member of the Canadian team, and we're going to guarantee you a spot? Or is this merit based? He'll have a chance to get his own spot by his play?
I can confidently say I don't know. I can confidently say maybe. That's where I'm at. And I say that because I don't know. First of all, John Herdman values loyalty. He values it in the people, the Sam Piets and Lucas Cavallinis of the world, who showed up to every single training camp through qualifying and played a few minutes here and there. Daniil Henry too, we can lump him in there. Did the job, raised the intensity in training, but didn't necessarily play. He values loyalty. So some of those players are in. So then do you bring in a completely new face? And in terms of, I guess, if we're looking at things from 30,000 feet, Luca Koleosho is a completely new face. Do you bring him in, but do you bring him in with the knowledge that, if there's 8 minutes left in a match against Morocco and we need a game breaker, why not? Right? It's a delicate balance. I do think that Luca Koleosho has interest in playing for Canada, because I think he sees more of a role for himself playing with a collection of young players compared to the United States. But obviously things could change. I think there is interest from the player in Canada. I think there was a lot of kind of people feeling a little bit more relaxed once he did choose to come back after that June camp, which was kind of just a mess. He was only going to be there for a week, and I think he was going to play in that game against Panama, and we all know how that turned out. At some point too, you do have to think about 2026. You really do. So, and is that Luca Koleosho? Is that getting Ismail Kone some minutes in the World Cup so that he feels better in a few years, or he feels more confident about leading the team in a few years, right? John Herdman always has an eye towards the future. So I do think he probably gets in. But I don't know. At this point, someone is going to be on the outside looking in, and I just don't know who that is yet. But I guess that's what we're going to watch for in these two games, is whether or not if he gets in 1 game, 2 games, what a vote of confidence for the player. If he does well and he shows well, you might have to say, well, we think we can get something from the player if we need him. So maybe we go for it.
I'm curious. Koleosho obviously will be in this camp. Do you think there's a chance that one of the younger dual national players who has not been a part of the camp would get get a spot at the World Cup, sort of as like if you commit to us. In the US, we call it the Julian Green thing. That's what they did in 2014. Mexico's sort of doing it with Marcelo Flores. Do you think that's something John Herdman right now would ever do?
Are we talking about like a Daniel Jebitson? Like, is that kind of who we're talking about?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah.
Okay, so if we talk about a player like him, I would lean towards no. I would lean because, I know it's a cliched term with this team, but that brotherhood, that sense of team unity is a big one. So I don't know if you want to upset the balance by bringing in a completely new face just because you can get him. I think there's going to be more and more talent emerging over the next few years. And I know that, we have this, disposition to look at the shiny new toy and say, how can we kind of get it in our fold? But Canada's not short on attacking talent. I would be very surprised. That's one thing that I did look at this camp to say, who is going to get the call and accept the call? Because to me, this was the last camp to kind of give guys, a shot to see what they're about. Theo Corbeanu, we can include him in there as well. I would lean towards no, but John Herdman has surprised us before, right?
It's true. Couple more questions, Josh. We got a question from the Discord. Ask AFP. S. McGinnis wonders, has there been any progress in the negotiations between the players and the CSA? Speaking of that disaster in June, he asked, will this be solved before November or could this get messy again?
I don't know if it gets messy again. I do think I think there's still certainly some issues to work out. I think there's still some people on both sides that are kind of unsatisfied with the way things stand. But I do think there is a recognition specifically from the players that, going to the World Cup without distractions is important. So it wouldn't completely surprise me if they go to the World Cup without a complete agreement. It wouldn't surprise me if they agree to punt things. Like their first game is in a little over 2 months, right? So it wouldn't surprise me if they punt it and just say we will get this done, because A, there's not a lot of time, and B, I don't think things are going to get messy before the World Cup, because I think there's an understanding from enough of the players that their careers could be made or broken at the World Cup, right? There's not a short list of players whose fortunes will turn with good World Cup performances. Honestly, Alistair Johnson, Kamal Miller, Jonathan Osorio, Stefan Eustáquio, right? Jonathan David, right? Kyle Larin, things could really change for a lot of players if they really announce themselves on the national stage. And I think that's in the back of their minds when it comes to these negotiations.
It's a great point. Well, Josh, thanks so much for your time. I think we could keep going for another hour or two, but in the interest of time constraints, where can people buy this book? It's coming out very soon, if not now.
Yeah, you can buy it wherever you buy your books. If it were me, I always tell people to, go downtown to your local bookstore, and if it's not there, ask them to order it for you, and they will. It should be available at those local bookstores, but then it's obviously available at, bigger box stores and bookstores. I know that, I've been told it's going to be available at Walmart if that's, up some people's alleys. But no, wherever you buy books, but I would recommend that you go to your local bookstore, you probably pick up another book that you would be interested in as well. And anywhere you buy books, I guess.
The Voyageurs, the Canadian men's soccer team's quest to reach the World Cup, highly, highly recommended. If you're a fan of soccer, Canadian soccer, or just soccer in general and want to learn more, this is quite the resource. Josh, thanks so much for joining us. We'll talk to you soon.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right, coming up after the break to wrap up the show, it's the mailbag, #AskAFP.
And welcome back. It's now time for Ask AFP, where Devang and David will do their best to answer all your questions. Thanks to everyone who sent in their questions this week on the Patreon Discord as well as Twitter. We're going to start with Roger TK, and he's going to ask David specifically, what do you expect from the U.S. men's national team during their prep matches against Japan and Saudi Arabia? Will they run out their best 11, or will they be letting players fight for spots in different games?
I think it's actually going to be 2-1 because of the injuries. And so Sam Vines is going to start a game at left back. Joe Scally's probably going to start a game at left back. With Anthony Robinson injured, that's the two best left backs in this camp. And I think you're going to see a lot of that, especially with the injury to Yunus Musa, the injuries to Timothy Weah. I think you're going to see a lot of that. The question ones are center forward. There's no way Jesus Ferreira starts both games. So, yeah, you could say that's rotation, although if Sargent's playing the way he's playing, maybe he is one of the best 11. I think he'll rotate the goalkeepers, but again, I don't think there is a best 11 at that position as well. So I guess the one real question is, do Tyler Adams and Weston McKennie and Christian Pulisic start both games? And I could see a space where they don't, especially because part of what you're trying to accomplish is like get Kellen Acosta comfortable again at the international level, playing as a D-mid and other things like that. So a bit of a muddled answer, but I would argue that with these injuries, with Chris Richards out and with all these other guys, there is no best 11. And so the top you can see out there is going to be rotated from game to game. And it is going to be guys hopefully trying to make the roster. I'm pretty hopeful about Sam Vines. He's taking the step I wanted him to. I think he's the best replacement for Robinson at center back. Not totally sure. And I feel pretty good about the number 9 position. I think Sargent playing the soccer he's playing is the guy. If you guys want to ask me about Jordan Pefok, you can, but watch out.
My question then back to you quickly, David, is this what you would want from this window prior to a World Cup, basically going into camp, or would you have wanted to have a healthy 11 or healthy, 9, and then have the other 2 fight? Or do you want to sort of tinker this way, the way that they're sort of forced to?
No, I would have rather it been a healthy team and sort of just solidify who you are, because it's been a while since you've played as a group. So that's what I would have rather see. And I think there would have been space in that to start a Sam Vines. There would have been space in that to rotate your goalkeepers. But like, I don't want to see Johnny Cardoso on a World Cup team. So I don't want to see him getting an opportunity. Malik Tillman kind of as well. So I wouldn't have preferred it this way. I would have preferred it as the quote unquote best 11 and space there for Greg Berhalter to make changes.
And Devang, I open this question up to you just because I'm making this my U.S. men's national team interview. But do we all assume, I know Greg Berhalter sort of hinted at it this week, 2 weeks ago, that Turner might be his guy. Do we think that there's a chance that Sean Johnson finds his way getting an opportunity to be a starter, or do we think that it's between Turner and, or is it just Turner's job?
I think Turner's going to get a chance to play quite a bit with Arsenal coming up as well. So it would make sense to me that Greg Berhalter's like, okay, we'll run with Matt Turner because we know that he's going to play the cup games for Arsenal, and due to some scheduling quirks, there's a lot of them coming up. So it's Turner's job to lose, I would reckon.
If that's the case, Devang, I agree with you. If it's not, if he's only played one game since he got there. If he only plays one game in the next 6 weeks and Stefan's still where he is at, I think Sean John starts the game.
Ooh. I'm on team Sean John, full stop. I think it'd be a really nice story for just him, how much time he's put in, and getting to see it all come to fruition would be really nice. Moving to Major League Soccer and maybe the starting 9 at the World Cup. T-Mac asks, what are you guys feeling about the released 22 under 22 that came out today? Jesus Ferreira being the number 1 guy in the 22 under 22 list. But what are your overall thoughts?
I think that's a good list. I like Ferreira's number 1. I like Almada as well. I guess Almada having that price tag, it's a bit different in the sense that like he has to be good. Whereas maybe some of these stories are a bit different as well. I would have put Tolkien a bit higher. I know he's already high at 6, but I this is more I just like watching him play, I guess, than maybe future prospects. But I really enjoy Tolkien's energy, his motor, his game in general as a defender.
I think it's realistic to be higher on him than Julian Araujo, who's right in front of him. I'm not saying I am, but I think it's fair that, the way Tolkien can play, I don't think that's out of bounds at all, Devang. I would say for me, going through this list, it wasn't the exact one I voted on. Obviously, I voted for a lot of people that didn't make the list or had people in way different spots, which is always interesting to look at it and be like, I wonder who voted on this and what they're thinking. But it's really just, and I mean, Sean, you ran a super draft website for a while, just how different it all is. Jesus Ferreira is 21 years old. He's already scored more goals so I went back 10 years to 2012. 2012 lift top 5. Breck Shea ended up with the most MLS career goals at 35, got sold for $3.3 million one time. No one else on the list got a transfer fee at any point in their career. Jesus Ferreira is a DP. He's already got 35 career goals, 18 this year. Almada's been sold for $16 million. Talis Magno, $10 million. He was on the Guardian's top 50 young players to watch in 2019. Gaga Slonina sold for $10 million to Chelsea. He's 18. 10 years ago, Sean John was 4th on that list. He was 23, turning 24, and had started pretty much the same amount of games. So just the stratosphere we're operating in, that Julian Araujo can come out of, U.S. academies and the LA Galaxy and start for the Mexican national team. Thiago Almada just got called up to Argentina's final pre-World Cup camp. He is in running, if he plays the way he plays, to make the World Cup for Argentina. I'm not saying Ecuador. I'm not saying New Zealand. I'm not saying whatever other random team that MLS could sneak a guy on the end of a roster. We're talking about Argentina. So I think that's the big thing that stood out to me, is just the stratosphere we operate in now being so different than what it ever has been. And not just to 10 years ago. I was talking to Matt Doyle and he was saying Diego Luna started at 10 for RSL last week and he wasn't even on this list. 5 years ago, he would have been top 15.
Completely. Even guys who are on this list. And once again, obviously you got to play the game and all that kind of stuff. But Efrain Alvarez was the hot prospect 3 years ago and was probably top 5, top 10 in this list. And he's 17th, sort of nowhere to be found in this. And obviously he's got opportunities to play, but it's incredible to see these top prospects that are still playing at an okay level, but getting bumped down because they're just bringing in all these talented guys above and continuing. Guys like Paxton Aronson, Cade Cowell, would be number 1 3-4 years ago. It's that's the one thing that I don't think I understood, the depth of youth they had in sort of until this list came out.
No, and this was one of my issues with voting on this list was Leon Flock's already probably a better player today than most of those guys ever will be. And Thiago Almada has already been sold for more than any of those players ever will, which is part of what you're sort of talking about when you talk about potential in soccer. But Jack McGlynn and Paxton Aronson are probably more skilled with a higher ceiling. So I found this one really hard to vote on. I didn't vote for a lot of the guys you just said. I didn't put Efrain Alvarez on my list. I don't. At some point, he's had his chances. And that doesn't mean his career is over, but I'm not going to put him on a list like this at this point. Cade Cowell's another guy where I think the next generation's better than him. And so while I don't challenge what he can be if he reaches his max potential, it's not anymore, you're a teenager that played, well, then you're going to be the best player in the world. There are other teenagers who are really good. And I go back to on the World Cup roster stuff. I don't know if I mentioned this, but someone was talking to me about Jack McGlynn and how most countries, if a kid was playing like that, you call him up to the pre-World Cup camp, sort of like Thiago Almada for the future. He's a year and a half younger than Brendan Aronson. Yeah. The future is the national team and all the young guys are the same age and they're not all going to be the best player that's ever come out of their clubs or the US. And so now you actually have options versus who the hell's a homegrown and they all make the list.
Yeah, like Devang, you got Jaden Nelson, who's played almost over 2,000 minutes this year at 20, right? And he's sort of this big guy. And then Jaquil sort of trickles in just on, I think, name alone. Maybe maybe something for his resume. But what do you think about Jaden at 20? You feel like that's the right level for him?
Yeah, really hard player to judge this year. I've been at times really, really impressed with what I've seen, and then at times despondent, I think, at some holes in his game. And he's 19 though, and I think that makes sense. I'm glad he hasn't been written off. I guess I'm glad that maybe some of these guys haven't been written off as a whole by the league, and I don't know if this is more about protecting their futures, like Jaquil. Like, why is Jaquil not playing right now is the question I have for TFC. But I think this is heartening after the season that they've had, because I had higher hopes for both those guys.
So I put Jaden pretty much where he landed. I think I had him 19 or 20. Because I just think already, again, if this is where he maxes out, he's like a tidy, now, right, Latif Blessing style center mid that can play in MLS, and he's only 19. He will get better, at least his game recognition. I talked to a bunch of people around the league, sort of like who they'd vote for. A lot of non-TFC people put DeAndre Kerr on their list. And I can't say that I've seen enough about him, but I thought that was, and it wasn't like one of Petrasso, Kerr, Tom, like it was always DeAndre Kerr. And so I thought that was really interesting.
Huh. Moving on with the last question, we got one from Jacob. Speaking about Toronto FC, obviously money is no issue when it comes to TFC, and free agent seems to be their focus for the international market. So who from the 2023 free agent market makes the most sense to join the Reds as a designated player? I had sent you guys the transfer market page with the expiring contracts. Is there anyone out there that sort of fits the role of that you would add for Toronto FC?
I'm heavily against the designated player center back. I think you gotta stay in the league to find some good defenders. That being said, Chris Smalling.
Oh,
Chris Smalling is my answer. That's who I want to bring in.
Okay.
My reasoning is that Chris Smalling has had not a humbling career, because he's still an amazing footballer who's played in the biggest high pressure environments possibly out there. But the way it's kind of tracked and going from United to Roma and being fine, more than fine, really good, I think that says a lot about him as a character. And I guess at 32, my question is, would he entertain the thought of doing that again for a bit more cash in a place where he can be a bit more comfortable as well? So that's my shout. Even though I don't know if many of these names don't appeal to me that much, that was an interesting one to me.
I like that one too, because this is a weird list. And it's like, are you going to go, is it Bellotti still at center forward? And like, are you really going to spend the money you need to for a center forward? Is that really the issue? I've already said I think they should give a DP contract to Aaron Long or Alex Collins and just clean it up that way. As Devang said, It's safer if you go in league than out of league. And, you know, Aaron Long came up under Jesse Marsh. And so you'd assume Bob Bradley will have a certain amount of comfort with him. So those are the names that I thought of. This is like a shocking list to look through. It's a real experience.
If we could get John Joe Shelby to MLS, I will help make it happen. I'll pick him up at whatever airport we need to do that. But
so yeah. Here's how I see it happening, and this is my giant. It all makes sense. Michael Bradley, final season as a double pivot beside Sergio Busquets, who is out of contract. Yeah. Those two just pulling the strings. It's not happening, but I think that would be absolutely hilarious. To have Michael Bradley and Busquets beside each other in a midfield.
I guarantee you he'd be playing in the middle of a back three by week 2. And it would be a train wreck. And Bob would be telling us all we're idiots because we don't see it.
And that is it.
Fiend. A perfect ending for a perfect show. A reminder, we are on patreon.com/a football podcast. Join us today, get the show ad free, get it early on Tuesdays. Plus, join us on the Discord where we're chatting footy all the time. We're also on Twitter at a football pod. Also, a rating and a review if you like the podcast would be incredible as we try to get this show into more people's ears. David, go ahead.
I just want to add, because he's not on now, so you can tell we're being genuine and not just saying nice things to his face. You should buy Josh's book. That was awesome.
Seriously.
I really liked it.
Seriously. I was going to conclude with a heartfelt plea. Do that also. If you go to the library, request it at your library so that more people can take it out and they'll buy it if people want to read it. So do that, because I still use the library all the time. It's great. Go buy Josh's book. It was a pleasure having him on. And I think that's it. Thank you for listening to AFB. For Greg on the ones and twos, and for Sean and David, thank you so much. We'll talk to you next week.